Have you ever stopped to wonder, what is the point of all this? We work, we eat, we sleep, we chase a few pleasures in between, and then we do it all over again. Is this all there is to life? Are we condemned like Sisyphus? We push our stone uphill only to watch it roll back down again. It's an uncomfortable question. And to avoid it, we convince ourselves that there is a deeper meaning to life. We need a grand narrative that makes sense of our struggle. Some of us choose religion, others dream of a better world, of utopia. But to many, such beliefs seem hollow, because we look at the world and we see chaos and indifference. What's left to us then are individual narratives of meaning, stories around family, career, and self-improvement. And we go to great lengths to maintain these stories because through them we can justify the inevitable pain, loss, and boredom of life. Because he who has a why for which to live can bear with almost any how. But our stories are fragile. They're only ever one tragedy away from crashing down on us. Imagine an Olympic athlete. She is constantly pushing her body to the limit because she dreams of that gold medal. But then one day she becomes permanently injured. Or a single mother who works 2 jobs to provide a good life for her son, and then suddenly she loses her child. Or a soldier who is fighting overseas, enduring the horrors of war because he believes that he is defending his country. And then he learns that the war was always about political power and corporate profits. The narratives that justify our hardships can always encounter circumstances that contradict its claims. And then our ego shatters and we suddenly fail to justify the burdens of life. Of course, we can eventually reinvent our narrative and adapt our ego in accordance with the new reality. But in those first moments, when the ground is pulled away beneath our feet, we encounter a deeply unsettling aspect of the human condition: the absurd. Here, man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. These are the words of the French-Algerian writer Albert Camus, taken from his philosophical essay The Myth of Sisyphus, which he published in 1942 in France under German occupation. In his book, Camus argues that the human condition exists in a tension between our deep yearning for meaning and the world's fundamental indifference. He calls this clash the absurd. Camus compares our struggle with the absurd to the fate of Sisyphus, a figure of Greek mythology who was condemned by the gods to roll a giant stone up a hill over and over again for all eternity. Camus argues that instead of abandoning the hill in despair, or pretending that salvation lies at the top, like Sisyphus, we should return to our stone, embrace its weight, and find joy in the struggle itself. And through that joy, defy the gods. Of course, most of us don't approach life in this way. Instead, we seek to avoid the absurd. We attempt to resolve it by appealing to a higher ground, by constructing a grand narrative of meaning. Most religions give life meaning by framing it as a test to judge the worth of our immortal souls. It is no accident that this theological hypothesis has been so popular throughout history because it solves 2 problems inherent to our condition. First, that despite of our deep-rooted yearning for purpose, we cannot find any objective meaning to our existence. And second, that even though we are hardwired for self-preservation, our existence will ultimately end. Religion conveniently negates these 2 contradictions by claiming that God has a plan for us and that we can never really die. And of course, these claims aren't based on any evidence. What they are based on is our need for comfort, our need to escape the absurdity of life. But religious faith isn't the only source of such comfort. Political ideology can be used in the exact same way. We can convince ourselves that if only we implemented our grand design to manage society, our collective struggle would finally come to an end. And so bringing about this utopia becomes our grand narrative. But of course, we tend to be far too idealistic. And once these ideas become our entire justification for being alive, we develop an ideological fervor that can justify horrific acts of violence. Without an appeal to a higher ground, our narratives can collapse inward upon ourselves. Then society becomes our lord and status our salvation. This cultivates narcissism, hustle culture, and the compulsion to endlessly optimize the self. We're liberated from religious and ideological meaning narratives only to become trapped in our own stories. Stories which demand that we never cease to perform. Stories that always remind us that we are not enough. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the burnout society, a system in which each one of us is both master and slave of self-optimization. We're locked inside our own inner work camp, where we drive ourselves towards endless productivity. Whether we believe in a divine plan, a coming utopia, or some lasting future happiness, most of us cling to a story that frames life as a journey towards salvation. But such comforting narratives blind us to reality. They act as filters that interpret all incoming information to validate their claims. They can even override our natural inclination towards compassion. The capitalist may dismiss social and environmental degradation as externalities. The nationalist may banish the refugee. The romantic idealist may become cruel when their partner proves merely human. And the believer may justify acts of violence in the name of God. At the same time, these narratives imprison us. When we're chained by dogma, loyalty, or the profit motive, we are bound to dishonesty, blind obedience, and exploitation. And because these stories are based on absolutist claims, their clash with reality is inevitable. When the story finally breaks, we either collapse inward or we lash out in violence. But those who remain lucid of inhabiting a meaningless world owe no allegiance to such narratives and their violent demands. This is why Camus rejects any attempt to avoid the absurd, whether through an appeal to God, transcendence, or a higher principle. To him, such a leap means refusing to fully confront reality. And through this refusal, we then sacrifice our freedom, our lucidity, and in turn our moral intuition. But how are we to live without a grand narrative to justify our struggle? How can we face the silence of the world and not fall into the dark pit of nihilism? If life means struggle without end, why not just end it? For Camus, this is the ultimate question of philosophy. Is life worth living, or should we opt out? He doesn't pose this question with cynicism or despair, but with philosophical curiosity. It's an honest and unflinching confrontation with the human condition. In renouncing life, Camus sees a confession that we are unwilling to confront the absurd. When we reject our existence because it lacks ultimate meaning, we still cling to the idea that life must be redeemed to be worth living. Nihilism is the fate of a disillusioned optimist. It isn't just a state of hopelessness, but an assumption that hope is required to move forward. But hope is just the inversion of fear. Both project life into the future, transforming our existence into an abstract notion. This means being unable to fully engage with the immediacy of life. By embracing the absurd, Camus asks us to go one step further. When we fearlessly accept the silence of the world, then there is no need to hope for redemption. Life is enough as it is. This is how absurdism affirms life. Like nihilism, it recognizes that the world is indifferent to our longing for meaning. But instead of responding with despair, it simply asks, so what? Do we need a guiding star at the horizon to enjoy the view? Is time spent with our loved ones only valuable if we can build an empire together? Is helping those in need pointless if there is no God to judge our deeds? Even without an inherent meaning to life, our actions can still feel meaningful. By embracing the absence of redemption, we learn to live with greater clarity and passion. And this radical acceptance brings a kind of ultimate freedom. We're liberated from belief systems and rigid conventions that bind us to a single mode of being. We're unburdened by the weight of grand ambitions and their inevitable disappointments. We're free to fully engage with what stands before us in each moment. And we are innocent, thrown into a silent world that demands nothing from us. That is true freedom. Camus calls this way of life revolt. A revolt not against the absurd, but in the face of it. Sisyphus revolts through happiness. He defies the gods by refusing to appeal to them and resisting to break down before them. Sisyphus chooses his rock. Our revolt is our refusal of both metaphysical hope and nihilistic despair. We stay aware of life's absurdity, and we choose this one life as it is, fragile, finite, and unjustified. Revolt means living for the intensity of immediate experience, and not for promises of salvation. Instead of chasing the one true love, the flawless self, or an eternal legacy, we resist the pull of the absolute. We find life's worth by living each moment fully, even in our struggle, and we let that be enough. Yes, that's easier said than done. But that is why Camus chooses the language of revolt. It is a stance that requires continuous effort. We have to choose again and again to remain lucid, to refuse comforting illusions, and to defiantly embrace our absurd reality. As long as we maintain that stance, our struggle will need no justification, because there is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn. To help us understand what such a life may look like, Camus presents a gallery of archetypes, each embodying revolt in their own way. The lover doesn't seek the one true love or simply sensual pleasures. To him, every encounter is finite, unique, and complete. He throws himself fully into love each time, without the illusion of happily ever after. The actor embodies countless lives, playing each with full dedication. In her performance, she remains lucid, always aware that it will pass. Instead of seeking everlasting fame, she finds her joy in the ephemeral play. The adventurer lives for action, but not in service of some great ideal. He pushes onward for the intensity of the struggle itself, and his destination exists only to give direction to his journey. The artist creates for the sake of creation. She resists the urge to explain the world. Clear-eyed, she captures the multiplicity of human experience without claiming absolute truth. And finally, Sisyphus, the absurd hero. He remains condemned to push his stone, fully aware of the futility of his task. But instead of responding with denial or despair, he chooses to accept his fate, and through his joy, he defies the gods. In his later works, Camus illustrates that such defiance doesn't mean living selfishly by only prioritizing personal happiness. Freedom from a grand narrative, be it religion, ideology, or ambition, doesn't imply freedom from responsibility. Even when we deny an objective framework for morality, actions still have consequences. And the harm our actions may cause or prevent sets the limits of our freedom. But instead of depending on moral frameworks that are rigid, narrow, and outdated, the absurd hero derives ethics from revolt. Because to revolt means to remain lucid in the face of another's suffering. It means to reject any ideological or divine justification for cruelty. It means to refuse nihilism, to refuse apathy, and to stand against needless harm, even if there is no final victory. In this way, revolt makes us naturally gravitate towards compassion and solidarity. But it seems solidarity is in short supply. Because instead of uniting in the struggle of our shared condition, we are insulated and divided by our narratives of meaning. For thousands of years, humanity fought over the opposing claims of religious dogma. Then God was declared dead, and ideology filled the vacuum it left behind. Ideological fervor brought us 2 world wars and a nuclear arms race that delivered humanity to the brink of annihilation. What followed was a period of relative stability and prosperity, authoring the grand narrative of infinite growth. But this story too is now starting to crack. Increasing wealth inequality, political instability, demographic collapse, and the accelerating climate crisis are casting serious doubts on whether humanity is destined for a better world. Our collapsing vision of a brighter future leaves behind another vacuum. It hungers for comforting narratives of redemption. Starved for meaning, we are easy prey for powerful predators.
It's Trump time.
Like the political con artists who pledge to restore past greatness and rally us into their righteous war against the traitor and the outsider. Or the transhumanist billionaires who promise us immortal life, superintelligence, and interplanetary colonies. They will deliver us utopia as long as we deliver them our privacy, our freedom, and our wallets. But our desperation blinds us to one crucial thing. Their megalomaniacal ambitions are driven by the same desperate need to escape the absurdity of life. Our collective longing for a grand narrative, for meaning and redemption, once again invites chaos into our world. It manifests as blind obedience to divisive ideologies, promotes xenophobia, authoritarianism, and nationalistic fervor. It fuels narcissism, grift, and mindless consumption. It spreads nihilistic abandon and epidemics of addiction. It drives us towards religious zealotry and technological fundamentalism. But what if instead we answer our longing by embodying the absurd hero? The brave soul who is not afraid to face in a different universe, who doesn't retreat into cynicism, distraction, or intoxication, but who remains active, focused, and lucid. The hero who doesn't buy into a narrative that promises redemption at the cost of their freedom and their moral judgment, who instead accepts their fate, doesn't deny the reality of pointless suffering and death, and in spite of everything, chooses to act, to love, to play, and to create, all for their own sake. A hero who meets misfortune with compassion, not as a means to gain divine favor or social status, but as a consequence of a courageous acceptance of our shared, absurd fate. The call to embody Sisyphus is not a promise of redemption. It is an acceptance of reality and a refusal of despair. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy.
No matter what happens tomorrow or for the rest of my life, I'm happy now.